Kia ora team, and welcome to another online tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about inherited variation and non-inherited or environmental variation, the effects of which on an individual, our mate here Jeffrey, okay, and whether or not those things can be passed on, / where they come from, how they affect us, and are they passed on to our offspring? Well, let's get started. First off, we have our inherited variation, which is dependent on our genotype. Okay, our allele is present, whereas our non-inherited or environmental variation is resulting from environmental exposure. Now, we're not going to deal with this side too much at the moment. We're going to talk about how this variation came to be, okay, and how it affects our mate Jeffrey here. Jeffrey would have had a mother and a father, okay, of whom hopefully loved each other very much, but is not required for sexual reproduction. Okay. Both of which would have produced gametes. For our female, our mother, it would have been our egg or our ova. Okay. For our father or our male reproducing, it would have been sperm. Okay. Both of which will carry 23 of their 46 chromosomes, which is half their genetic material. Okay. Now, these two gametes, these two sex cells, would have come together and formed a zygote in the process of fertilization. The beginning of our mate Jeffrey. Okay. This would have gone through mitosis a number of times and eventually become a fetus or a baby. Okay. Of which has 46 chromosomes. Okay. 23 from each parent. All right. An allele for each of their traits from both. Okay. There's variation there, which if you're still confused about, we will talk about in a future video on meiosis versus mitosis, and variation caused by sexual reproduction. Anyway, if we get off that track quickly, and bear with me for a moment here while I rub this out. We've just established that through sexual reproduction, our genotype has been established for Jeffrey, and his inherited variation is present due to the genotype that he has for those various traits. Now, if we were to identify some of those, okay, we got our blonde hair, we got our pointed nose, and we have our detached earlobes. Okay. Now, let's assume that this blonde hair, which has a genotype of lowercase h, two recessive alleles, okay, is what has been inherited, as well as we'll give them another homozygous genotype, but this time dominant trait for his detached earlobes. For us this time will be big E, right? And another little recessive, homozygous recessive for his nose, which is a pointed nose. And we'll give them little n. Okay. So just examples of some observable phenotypes of which we know the genotype for. Now, in reality, for a dominant phenotype such as the detached earlobes, we wouldn't know that it's homozygous dominant, just that at least one dominant allele is present. Okay, so that would be inherited variation which has been dependent on the genotype which is inherited from his parents through sexual reproduction. Now let's talk about non-inherited or environmental variation. Now our friend Jeffrey here got a job in a dangerous factory. and ended up having a few incidents. Unfortunately, he lost his eye and his ear in a dangerous workplace accident. So let's just mimic that quickly. Now Jeffrey has a single eye, okay, and a missing ear. So I'm going to draw those sections of variation phenotypes present on our right-hand side. Okay. And his missing ear. So these features of variation present on Jeffrey were not inherited through his DNA. He wasn't born missing his eye from this accident, and he wasn't born missing his ear. Okay? And as a result, if our mate Jeffrey was to sexually reproduce himself, he could not pass on this variation. So if Jeffrey was to have a baby, okay, plus some lady, right, have a baby,
that baby.
So if our mate Jeffrey was then to have a child with an unknown female, okay, these particular traits could not be inherited. Right? Just because he has lost an eye and lost his ear doesn't mean that his baby would be born with one eye and missing an ear. Okay, so we know this can't happen. So we're going to cross that out. Okay, it's not possible. Whereas our phenotypes, which are controlled by the genes in which we have, right, and the alleles present within our genome, this can be inherited. So we would be able to, through sexual reproduction, okay, produce a child which had, and let me just draw this quickly. So we would be able to produce a child or offspring through sexual reproduction that has inherited the same traits which are present in the parent's genotype. Okay. Now, assuming that the individual in which Jeffrey has produced this offspring with, has sexually produced with, has the genes present for these genotypes to be present. So if Jeffrey was to then breed with an individual who had blonde hair and a pointy nose, okay, we would get an individual such as here, with another child or an offspring produced with blonde hair, detached earlobes, and a pointy nose. So, what are our main takeaways from this? Okay, many traits determine our appearance have been inherited from our parents. Okay, every single cell in our body contains the DNA and a copy of those alleles responsible for our inherited traits, those that can be passed down to our children. However, some variation can be acquired during our lifetime from environmental factors. Okay. Now, it doesn't have to be as extreme as losing an ear or losing an eye. It could just be by being smaller, for example, as in having less food available, or loss of sight due to an injury, like our mate Jeffrey. This variation cannot be passed down to the offspring because it is not in the DNA. The only time Inheritable variation can be passed on to the offspring is if mutation has occurred. And that would have to happen inside those sperm or egg cells, our gametes. Okay, but that's a topic for another day. Hopefully this has been helpful, talking you through inherited variation and non-inherited variation. Okay, remembering that inherited variation dependent on our DNA, non-inherited variation dependent on our environment, cannot be passed on. Have a lovely day, team. Get out there and get into it.